Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive straight into the incredibly intricate machinery that is literally keeping every single one of your cells alive right now. It's an absolutely fascinating topic, mostly because we're looking at the fundamental engine of life itself.
So, to get us started, I want you to think about a super simple question. How long can you hold your breath? I mean, really, go ahead, take a deep breath. Most people can only manage, maybe 30 to 45 seconds before their body just starts screaming for air. You know that feeling, right? It becomes this overwhelming, downright panicked urge to inhale. Well, medics actually have a neat shorthand for this called the Rule of 3. It goes like this. Humans can survive about 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, but just 3 minutes without oxygen. That oxygen clock starts ticking the second you stop breathing, and literally just 3 minutes without it can cause irreversible damage or, even death. But why? Why exactly is our cellular machinery so desperately dependent on oxygen?
To answer that, we're going to take a structured tour through the cellular currency factory. We'll be hitting the oxygen clock, ATP as the energy currency, step 1, which is glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, and finally, plan B, anaerobic respiration.
All right, section 1, the oxygen clock, setting the stakes.
Let's start by looking at the stark contrast between how humans and plants actually handle this gas exchange. As humans, we have lungs, right? A centralized system that pulls in oxygen and pumps it everywhere. But plants? They don't have lungs. Every leaf, root, and stem essentially breathes locally. They use these tiny pores, stomata on their leaves, and lenticels on their stems. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates a major myth we need to bust right off the bat. Plants don't just perform photosynthesis. No way. They also breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide to run their very own metabolisms, completely independent of making their food.
Moving on to section 2, ATP, the energy currency, banking the output. Because listen, whether you're a human eating a sandwich or a plant breaking down glucose from the sun, the ultimate end goal is exactly the same, extracting energy.
But here's the catch. Cells can't just take a molecule of glucose and release all its energy at once. If we simply broke all those carbon bonds in one go, the massive release of energy would just burst into useless damaging heat. We'd literally burn up from the inside. So instead, we have to trap that energy step by step into a biological bank. And the currency we use for that? It's called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This is the universal cellular energy currency. Everything you do, thinking, moving, even just listening to me right now, spends ATP.
To get the absolute most bang for our glucose buck, aerobic respiration uses this incredibly efficient 3-step manufacturing process. First up is glycolysis out in the cytoplasm. Next, the Krebs cycle deep in the mitochondrial matrix. And finally, the electron transport chain on the inner membrane.
Okay, section 3, step 1, glycolysis, the cytoplasm lobby.
So glycolysis is this universal process happening out in the cell's cytoplasm, that jelly-like substance filling the cell. And surprisingly enough, it doesn't even require oxygen yet. Think of glycolysis like taking a sledgehammer to a 6-carbon glucose block. But as they say, you gotta spend money to make money. The cell invests 2 ATP right up front just to destabilize the glucose. This splits it into 2 3-carbon molecules, which eventually get converted into a super useful 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. And over the course of the split, we earn 4 ATP back, giving us a neat little net profit of 2 ATP.
But wait, ATP isn't the only thing we're making here. During this split, we're also loading up our very first mobile dump trucks, these molecules called NADH. Seriously, think of NADH exactly like a cellular dump truck whose entire job is to capture high-energy electrons and protons. It follows that classic OIL or IG principle from chemistry class. Oxidation is losing, reduction is gaining. So when an NAD molecule gains these electrons, it gets reduced into our fully loaded dump truck, NADH, ready to drive those electrons to the final stage.
If we take a quick look at our first scorecard, it's a pretty modest start. We spent 2 ATP, we gained 4, which leaves us a net total of 2 ATP in hard cash. And we also have 2 fully loaded, uncached NADH dump trucks waiting for transport.
Which brings us to section 4, the Krebs cycle, the mitochondrial matrix.
Obviously, 2 ATP is nowhere near enough to run a complex organism like you or me. So we take our leftover pyruvate molecules and move them deep into the inner compartment of the mitochondria, the matrix, to squeeze out a whole lot more value. The Krebs cycle is essentially a giant carbon shuffling machine. In a prep step, our 3-carbon pyruvate gets snipped down into a 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA, which releases a carbon as CO2.
Then, that 2-carbon molecule jumps onto a 4-carbon molecule, creating a 6-carbon molecule called citrate. And as this cycle turns, special enzymes are continually snapping carbons off. And what happens to those snapped-off carbons? Well, they're released as carbon dioxide. Yep, the very same carbon dioxide that you eventually exhale with every single breath.
All right, time for another scorecard update. Now, the Krebs cycle only gave us 2 more direct ATP, so that brings our cache total to 4 ATP. But think about our fleet of dump trucks. By systematically shredding those carbon bonds, we've loaded up 8 more NADH plus 2 of a brand new kind of carrier called FADH2. So right now, our fleet is completely loaded up and ready to be cashed in.
Moving right along to Section 5, the electron transport chain, the moneymaker.
Here is where the magic really happens, guys. The electron transport chain is the ultimate factory generator. All those NADH and FADH2 dump trucks roll up and drop off their high-energy electrons. These electrons then travel down a chain of proteins, kind of like a conveyor belt. And as they move, their energy is aggressively used to pump protons across the membrane, building up this massive, highly pressurized gradient. Desperate to escape that pressure, these protons eventually rush back through a specialized protein called ATP synthase. And it literally spins. It spins like a microscopic hydroelectric turbine, slamming phosphate groups onto ADP to recharge massive, and I mean massive amounts of ATP.
Okay, so we've built all this amazing energy. But remember that ticking oxygen clock from the very beginning of the explainer? Where on earth has oxygen been this whole time?
Well, I absolutely love this quote. It's wonderfully blunt, but completely accurate. Cyanide and suffocation in general cause death via electron constipation. Ha! You see, at the very end of that conveyor belt, those spent electrons need somewhere to go. They can't just pile up. So oxygen acts as the final electron acceptor. It patiently waits at the end of the chain, catches the electrons, grabs a couple of protons, and harmlessly forms water.
Think about it. If you stop breathing, oxygen isn't there to clear the end of the belt. The electrons back up, the pumps break down, the proton gradient dies entirely, and that ATP synthase turbine, it completely stops spinning. Without oxygen, we completely miss out on cashing in our dump trucks for a whopping 34 ATP at the end of the chain. Instead, we're stuck with just the measly 4 ATP we made earlier.
And that brings us to Section 6, Plan B, anaerobic respiration, when the clock runs out.
Because biology is incredibly resilient, right? Some organisms live in environments completely without oxygen. And hey, even our own cells sometimes run out of it during incredibly heavy exercise. So when that oxygen clock runs out and the main chain shuts down, cells pivot to fermentation just to keep that initial glycolysis loop running. They take 2 distinct chemical paths depending on the organism. In human muscles, say when you're doing a heavy sprint, this cell reduces pyruvate directly into lactic acid. You know that deep burn you feel? That's what's happening. But in organisms like yeast, they use alcoholic fermentation, snapping off a carbon as CO2 and converting the rest into ethanol.
But think about this number, 2. Without oxygen, your total net gain of ATP per glucose molecule drops to just 2. It is a far, far cry from the 38 ATP you get when the oxygen flows freely. But it's just enough to keep the factory's emergency lights on and keep the cell alive in a pinch.
Honestly, it's truly incredible to step back and realize that this exact same microscopic currency exchange, this deeply intricate dance of carbons, dump trucks, and turbine gradients, connects us to almost every single living thing on Earth. Whether it's a blade of grass silently breathing in the sun, or your own muscles burning as you sprint down the street, the core machinery is universally shared. So it leaves us with a totally fascinating thought to ponder. If we share this incredibly precise, ancient engine with the plants outside your window, what other deeply universal secrets are hiding in plain sight inside your very own cells? Thanks so much for joining me on this explanator, and keep questioning the incredible world inside you.